Students, this is the Constitutional Convention Readers Theater. The Constitutional Convention begins. Congress held this meeting to revise the Articles of Confederation because of the issues that were coming up out of the weaknesses from the Articles of Confederation. It was voted to keep these debates secret. That was so that public kind of scrutiny or opinions couldn't influence the decisions made in that room. A total of 55 delegates from 12 states. Rhode Island did not send a delegate and abstained from attending. Convened in Philadelphia for the Constitutional Convention. And this is a reenactment or reader's theater of what that event was like. These different names have been simplified, so instead of referring to individual characters like Roger Sherman, Thomas Jefferson, Alexander Hamilton, it definitely simplifies it so you can understand the northern perspective, the southern perspective, and understand what was compromised in this meeting at the Constitutional Convention. We did try to pick appropriate people where the vague name doesn't allow us to pick specific individuals from the time. So, of course, we picked Morgan Freeman for our narrator. I will do my best to make the voices as interesting as possible, but some of them go back to back and my southern accent kind of slips in and out. So, to begin, narrator. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Here we are in 1787, and it has come time for us to solve the problems that face this great new nation. We need to create a government by the people, of the people, and for the people that will last for generations. Here we go to Philadelphia, where this idea of government has been debated over for several weeks. Let's listen. Mr. President, played by George Washington, because he actually did reside over the Constitutional Convention. Gentlemen, let's not go to war over this. Who here has some ideas for us to consider with the case for creating a large government? So this is the large government side. Mr. States, President, may I speak? Mr. President, yes, you may, Mr. States. Mr. States, I address this convention gathered here today in the hopes of persuading you all to vote against any actions of a large government. We have had enough of tyranny from our leaders, and yet we too quickly jump back to the large government that is powerful enough to grant us everything, but is also powerful enough to take it all away. We cannot live in fear of our government as a people. I cannot, with a clear heart and good conscience, support any decision that puts us in danger of losing the few rights we have fought so hard to win. I plead that you side with me and those of us who know the value of maintaining the rights we fought so hard to win. And yes, we did put a picture of Thomas Jefferson because he'll will kind of have the Jeffersonian ideals of a smaller national government, and he will argue for stronger states' rights as the Southerner that he was. Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. States. Any others who wish to speak this day? Mr. Nation. I do, Mr. President. Mr. President, you may address this convention, Mr. Nation. Now, Mr. Nation, also representing the Federalists, is represented by Alexander Hamilton in this because he's arguing for bigger government, which is the perspective that he held. And he was a New Yorker, but I'm not good at a New Yorker accent, so I'm probably going to mess this up terribly. Gentlemen, I address you, everything just goes southern. I address you this day in favor of a central government. We have waited too long for these states to side with each other. We have concerns over the way that we as states interact with one another. We once fought side by side for a greater cause as brother in arms, and now we are here fighting the men we once stood by side with. We cannot move forward with this great dream if we do not unite under one nation and flag. We cannot allow the issues of present to affect our vision of being a truly great nation. We must unite under a central government so that we can work together for a common good. Gentlemen, if we are to ever be the United States, we must unite now.
To President. Thank you, gentlemen, for reminding us the reasons why we are here this time. we must make a decision about whether or not to create a united government and a country at this time. Narrator. The Founding Fathers have a decision to work out. They must decide what they will do. Will they continue to live as a non-united country of states, also known as a confederation of states, or a group of states that chose to work together? Or will they decide to unify as a large and potentially powerful country? Let's find out. Mr. President, gentlemen, this is clearly a passionate topic for both of you. Are there any of you that want to discuss a possibility for a compromise? Mr. Federalism. I do, Mr. President. Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. Federalism. Mr. Federalism. Gentlemen, I propose we compromise on this issue and move to allow for a national government that ensures a protection of rights for every citizen, the ability to create a military and a way to interact with other nations who may one day be a threat to us. I also propose that we allow individual states the opportunity to determine for their citizens what they want to do, as long as it does not go against the liberties, freedoms, and ideas that the national government creates. Gentlemen, I persuade you to vote in favor of this compromise and allow us to move forward with bright hopes for what our country can be. Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. Federalism. Gentlemen, can we move to a vote on this issue? All those in favor of a compromise answer with aye. Mr. Federalism and Mr. Nation? Aye. Mr. President. Those opposed answer with a nay. Mr. States, represented by Thomas Jefferson. Nay. Mr. President. The measure stands with the majority in favor of the presented compromise. Narrator. That is exciting. The constitutional delegation has decided to move forward in creating a national government. Now, to make the really tough decisions. Mr. President, gentlemen, now that it is settled that we have a national government combined with the states having their own governments, let us decide what our national government should look like. Mr. Executive, I speak in front of you this day in favor of a democratic system, where we elect a president and he represents us. We elect him and he must answer to us with the decisions he makes. This man would serve our interests as we are the ones who select him, and the states will be able to elect a president or governor for their own states as well. This idea will work because the president will know that he can have his job taken from him as citizens vote again, and perhaps with somebody else as president this time around. Mr. Congress. Loudly, almost like a fight. Mr. Executive, I wish to address the concern that many of us feel about the power being left in the hands of just one man. We have seen through tragic events of our recent history what happens when we allow all the power to be with a single ruler. They can do as they wish, and unfortunately, we have seen men abuse this power to the point of revolution. We just fought off one tyrant. Let us not create an opportunity for another to emerge. I also plead with this group of gentlemen gathered here to vote for a more direct governing body, one that is the people from the states who gather in a place like this to discuss and determine what the government should do and which laws should exist. Laws that will help the states. Mr. Congress, too, or Congress's backup. I agree with Mr. Congress. I also feel that we should have people who we choose to make decisions about laws for us. I'm confident that we as people can have more power and prevent tyranny by allowing more people to make decisions in the matters of government instead of a single person. Mr. President, for a vote on the proposed plan of creating a government made up of people who are elected from the states. Mr. President, any objections to a vote on the matter? Mr. Executive, I object. How will we know these men are not just going to do what is right for their state and not the country as a whole? I request a vote be made on a compromise, an elected president to work for the whole country and state-chosen representatives to work for the states. May we move for a vote on my compromised plan? Mr. President, any objections to a vote on this matter? I hear of no objections. Let's vote. Those in favor of the proposed compromise answer with aye. Mr. Executive, Mr. Congress 1, and Mr. Congress 2 all respond with aye. Mr. President, any opposed to the proposed compromise answer with nay. I hear no objections. We will proceed knowing that we have a Congress representing each state and a president representing the whole country. Narrator, the Constitutional Convention just voted to have a Congress and a president. How exciting. They are now going to discuss what role the Congress plays and what role the president will play. Let's see how their conversation goes. Mr. President, let us discuss now what the Congress will do in our government. I personally feel that if they are from our states, they would be the best voice on taxes and state-to-state conflicts. Are there any of you who would like to add to this description? Mr. Statesman, I agree with you, Mr. President, and would like to add the responsibility of creating laws, taking care of the military, and dealing with citizens who feel that the law is unfair to them. Mr. Statesman 2, I disagree with you, Mr. Statesman. I feel a court system should be the way to deal with citizens who feel that a law or tax is unfair. And because I think this could become a major concern, I propose that we create a Supreme Court to determine if the laws created by Congress are fair. Mr. President, I ask that before we move on, we vote on whether or not to create a Supreme Court to enforce fairness of laws and taxes. Mr. President, all those in favor of a Supreme Court to determine if laws and taxes are fair, answer with aye. Mr. Statesman 1 and Mr. Statesman 2. Aye. Mr. President, it appears that we will have a Supreme Court. Anything else to add, gentlemen? Mr. Statesman 1. I have nothing further. Mr. Statesman 2. Neither do I. Mr. President, let's go back to where we were. What should our Congress look like? Mr. New Jersey, who is represented by the boss, Bruce Springsteen. I feel that we should be able to send the same amount of representatives so that every state has equal power. Now, this is where the name is really important. The New Jersey plan has equal power because it was a smaller, less populated state. It wanted every state to have the same representation. However, Mr. Virginia, which represents a highly populated state, says, well, I say, hold on there, Mr. New Jersey, I disagree. I think states with more people should get more people in Congress. After all, we are bigger and most likely have bigger needs. Mr. New Jersey, but then we small states do not get the power we deserve. Mr. Sherman, gentlemen, how about we compromise once again? What if we had 2 houses in our Congress, a Senate where each state has equal power, and people in a House of Representatives where each state has a different number depending on how many people live there? So based off of population. I think this would be a great compromise as it would allow us to hear lots of opinions and create fair laws for both big and small states. Mr. President, I ask that we vote on my compromise plan, the Sherman Plan. Mr. President, also known as the Connecticut Plan because Mr. Sherman was actually from Connecticut. So just a heads up. Mr. President, very good. Any opposed to voting on Mr. Sherman's compromise? No objections. Let us move forward and vote. All those in favor of creating 2 houses of Congress vote with aye. Mr. New Jersey and Mr. Virginia All declared aye. Mr. President, any against 2 houses of Congress vote with nay. No objections. You may proceed, Mr. Sherman. Mr. Sherman, I ask the question, though, how do we calculate slaves, women, and Native Americans into our populations? They do not vote. Should we still count them as people? This is a discussion that they had. Mr. South now. Well, I say, Mr. Sherman, I feel very strongly that slaves must be counted for numbers, or else we will not have sufficient members from our state in the House of Representatives. However, I do not feel that the need to count women or Native Americans, since they are not important to the government of a state and country. Interesting. Mr. North. Mr. South, I disagree with your plan to count slaves unless you also want them to vote, which I think you do not, as you do not want them to vote to free themselves from slavery. Therefore, I ask that we do not count slaves as part of the population numbers, because you have to remember, in the South you have a higher population of slaves versus in the North, where you have most states that have outlawed it or don't allow slavery in there. Mr. Fitz, whose name has a purpose. Gentlemen, I think we can resolve some concerns that you have. However, how would you feel about creating an additional compromise that allowed a portion of slaves to be counted as population while also not allowing them to vote? I think counting slaves as 3/5 of a person should be sufficient for both purposes. That means every 5 slaves you have, they count as 3 people for the population purposes. So the South didn't get credit for all the slaves that they had when it came to representation in the House of Representatives. But they also didn't lose out on that entire section of their population, which made the South happy. Mr. North, I can support that. Mr. South, I also can support that. Mr. President, it seems that conflict is resolved. Any other objections? It seems that the resolution passes and we have created a government for ourselves. Are there any other concerns that you gentlemen have about the government we just created? Narrator, you just watched some of the best compromising in the history of America. Men from very different backgrounds and experiences came together to create a government by the people, for the people, and of the people, to last for generations. Let's see how it all looks when put together. Mr. President, by my notes, we have created the framework of a constitution that asks for a president who enforces laws for the whole country, 2 houses of Congress, the Senate and the House of Representatives, that creates laws, make sure the military is taken care of, and to charge taxes. And we created a Supreme Court to make sure that the laws and taxes passed are fair to everybody. Any changes that we need to make, gentlemen? Very good. We will begin creating the document immediately. Narrator, ladies and gentlemen, that is how the Constitution came to be. Now we have a government created by the people, made up of the people, and for the people, that has lasted for over 200 years. These slides we're going to go over together as a class, discussing the Virginia Plan, which is why we had Mr. Virginia, and the different compromises and the debates over slavery. All right. Thank you very much.